Good evening, everybody. Georgia has a night off. I'm Rene Ritchie. It is August 29, 2012, and tonight we will be talking about the iPhone 5 and NFC, the iPad mini and October, AirPlay and Wi-Fi Direct, and the $1 billion Apple versus Samsung patent victory. This is the iMore Show. Joining me tonight is the CIO of Nickelfish and the co-host of Iterate, Mr. Seth Clifford. How are you, Seth?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Georgia has a night off, so it's just you and me tonight, and I think we might aim to misbehave.
Yeah, that's fine. Sounds pretty shiny.
Excellent. So let's just get I'm so tired of talking about Samsung versus Apple. I did a podcast with Phil on Saturday. I did a podcast with the lovely fellows at MacBreak Weekly, Leo Laporte, Andy Anatko, and Rich Siegler of Barebones Software yesterday. And I don't have too much left to say, Seth, so I'll let you go first. What is your takeaway from, I guess I'm going to call it groundbreaking, $1.05 almost billion judgment?
Yeah, before we start, let's agree not to spend too much time on this because I think it's been beaten to death already. But we can definitely
no, get your kicks in. It's been curbed. You can stomp a little bit.
I was honestly very, very shocked to both hear that Apple kind of swept the verdict, and also that the judgment was so steep. After all of the news that was coming out of that trial back and forth, it looked as though, I wasn't following it as closely as a lot of the other bloggers and journalists and people were. So I was, I had a very cursory understanding of how it was going, but I saw kind of the quote unquote greatest hits as they were coming out. And it just seemed like there was just like an air of silliness to the proceedings. And I think a lot of that was the judge, kind of her comments along the way, but I didn't really expect that kind of verdict. I guess overall, it makes sense to me, and I guess I wouldn't say I'm pleased with it, but I'm satisfied. Like, okay, well, that's great. That's over now, and obviously there'll be appeal after appeal after appeal, and it'll go on ad infinitum. But I think that it's an interesting verdict because I think it sets a very clear precedent for the industry that is. We've been kind of dancing around for the past year or two, and I think this kind of coalesces it in a way that some of us may have been expecting, some of us weren't expecting, but now that that's out, and the cat's out of the bag, there's no going back from here. I think it's going to be a very different kind of market, and there's already been people saying oh, Samsung's dumping Android and going to Windows, and that kind of weird reactionary hyperbole in any direction is useless. It's just stupid. But I think things will be a little bit different from here on out. I think they're going to have to maybe tread a little lighter. And of course, I say that after seeing the Windows 8 tablet/laptop thing that looks exactly like a MacBook Air. But I don't know. I digress. What are your thoughts?
What was my question? Is that what you're about to say? No, I think the only thing that really changed for me since we spoke about it on Saturday with Phil Dickinson from Android Central is the jury has been talking a little bit, and the foreman of the jury spoke a bit. And I'm now of the opinion, I kind of wish they don't speak, because the more they speak, the worse I kind of feel about it. And I have the opinion now that Samsung ran a red light and was speeding and got pulled over and got a ticket. And $1 billion for Samsung is a ticket. I mean, it's not a death sentence. It's just a ticket. And I feel like the cop was like Roscoe P. Coltrane, or a Keystone cop. He's a little bit bungling, a little bit goofy. And they deserved the ticket, but the way the ticket was mentally achieved seems kind of awkward to me now.
Right.
That's my big takeaway.
No, I think that's probably accurate. It doesn't need to be much more than that. I mean, this got headlines just because of the type of trial that it was, and obviously anything Apple gets headlines, but this is business as usual in the technology industry. This kind of stuff happens every day, goes on for years at a time. I'm surprised we got a verdict as soon as we did, but it sounded like the court really wanted to reach a conclusion and move on.
Yeah, and but the thing that disappointed me, and I've been disappointed this way before, is that humans are strange creatures. Humans can find anything to argue about. If you put identical twins in a room, they will start accusing each other of having petty differences. And just the amount of Apple and Android fanaticism that we saw over the weekend was deeply depressing to me. And it bothered me enough that I put it in my editorial. And I just wanted to elaborate on it again. We should not be fighting over these companies. These companies should be fighting over us. They should be fighting tooth and nail, making the best devices, the best services, the best solutions to win us over. We shouldn't be yelling at each other over which company's products we buy. We should not be hating other people based on the bits of plastic and metal and glass in their pockets being different than the bits of plastic and metal and glass being our products. Because when we do that, we as a species and culture lose. We prove that we have not crawled out of the primordial ooze anywhere nearly sufficiently enough. And I would just like to take a moment, step back. I want to applaud Android Central for how they handled it. I want to applaud The Verge and CNET, a couple other places for the way they handled it, because they treated it as a trial and about patents and copyrights and not about people and their choice of which gadgets they use or do not use.
No, you're right. I mean, a simple, I'm searching for the word. I mean, as I said before, this is business as usual. This kind of thing happens. Patents get sued over, and, companies do this over and over and over again. And the fact that it kind of has come to exemplify this stupid holy war between these two platforms just makes the whole thing sillier, and it forces everyone to lose sight of what is actually happening. And I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with you that the sooner we can get past, my phone is better than your phone, the better off we'll be, the better the market will be, the better humanity will be. But obviously this has been going on as long as people have had.
Well, I want them fighting. I want Google making the best phones they can so that Apple's forced to make the best phones they can. I hope RIM knocks it out the park with BlackBerry 10 so that iOS 6 and the iPhone 6 are as good as they can possibly be. Apple is good about not being complacent, but they're great about being angry about competition, and that's what I want.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, ultimately, better phones mean better phones, right? Better phones beget other better phones. And as long as everybody is putting each other, to the curb, as you said earlier, we're going to make out well as customers, because there's just going to be cooler gadgets and stuff like that.
And I do hope, this is a nascent industry. A lot of industries have gone through all these lawsuits and licensing agreements. I mean, you can go back and look at RIM and Palm suing each other over keyboards, and Kodak and other companies suing over photography. This happens in every industry. And eventually they mature and licensing agreements are struck and patents are ruled valid or invalid. And all of this just goes away. And people, as Jerry Hildenbrand from Android Central says, one rich company pays another rich company some sum of money, and they all just go about their business. And then they have to make good phones again. Yeah.
I just want to mention one thing. Soccerald in the chat room is kind of goading us, saying, like, don't hold your breath. Who are you trying not to offend? It's not that. It's not that I'm not trying to offend anyone. It's that I'm a geek and I like a lot of different things, and I simply don't care enough about this to take a side. I just don't. I don't care. I have like 70 different kinds of phones in the office that I get to play with every day. I've been into computers and crap like this since I could, barely walk. I don't park my car in any one garage. I don't care enough to care.
Well, here's the thing. There is no solution at the end of this where we don't win. Either Samsung gets to go about their business making more phones like the Galaxy S3, or they have to do things differently from Apple and come out with even crazier, different phones that we might like better. This is not a lose. There was a lot of crazy stories over the weekend about how this destroys innovation, or and they're just bizarre because innovation always wins. If Apple wins and Samsung has to make a different phone, we get cool slide to unlocks that look different than Apple. And I'm happy because I actually enjoy some of the different Android slide to unlocks. And if Samsung wins, they've already made the Galaxy S3, which is really different than the Galaxy S2. And I'm assuming the Galaxy S4 will be even more different. Nature tends to find a way. So forgive me if I'm not diatribing about the loss of innovation, which seems to get knifed to death every time I turn around on the internet.
Yeah, and when these kinds of things actually affect my own daily life and my world, then I'll give a crap about it.
All right. So if we spent enough time talking about stuff we don't want to spend time talking about.
Yeah, let's move on.
All right. iPhone 5 rumors. Since 2010, since before the iPhone 4 came out, there have been rumors that Apple would adopt NFC, near field communications. And I am not a radio engineer, but I believe near field communications is sort of a type of RFID, or a way to send very low power, passive radio signals from a device to another device. And we already see these. For example, credit cards have easy pay systems where you can just wave them and pay for your gas. And passports have RFID chips that can identify certain things about the passport holder. And there are Android phones and other phones that have RFID chips in them that you can, what's the proper word? Swing, swipe, wave. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, I would probably say wave. It's proximity, so you got to be close and you got to get them near each other.
Yeah, and it does all sorts of neat things. And AnandTech took a look at the leaked cases for the iPhone 5. And the iPhone 5, if these leaks are correct, has a metal back with a glass part on the top and the bottom to be radio transparent so the LTE, 3G, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth radios can work. And based on their assessment and the requirements of NFC, I mean, you want an NFC thing to be user-friendly. You don't want to have 1 millimeter of the phone have to line up exactly on the sensor. You want to be able to wave it at any angle, so it needs a field. And he did not believe that the metal back would allow for this. And to that, our friend Jim Dalrymple of The Loop and of Amped gave one of his trademark yeps, which, I mean, is fairly good as gold that there will not be NFC on the next iPhone. Does that bother you at all, Seth? Does that make you feel like Apple is doomed and falling behind?
No, certainly not. I mean, I'm of two minds when it comes to NFC. One is that Apple is exactly the kind of company that has the connections and the clout to be able to say to other companies and other businesses in the consumer market, hey, how about you get on board with this with us, and we kick this thing off, and this is going to be the next big thing. And, you know, a while ago we had talked about this, and you had mentioned, I think, like Starbucks and Target and like partners like that you could see them working with to kind of just put this stuff in front of consumers. So on one hand, I see them being the company to really bring this to the forefront and make it consumer friendly. Because right now, yeah, it's in some phones and there are some things you can do with it and they're cool, but it's just not everywhere. Like I don't think I've even seen a terminal yet in my, you know, daily comings and goings around here. So I think Apple could definitely be the one to like bring it to the forefront of consumer awareness. At the same time, Apple is a company that, as we know, takes a good idea that's already entered the market and reshapes it and makes it better for other people and then
for our moms.
Right. And then that's their product. So I'm kind of thinking, well, in this case, that stuff isn't even really widely available yet. Like, there's no consumer understanding about it. Like, people knew what MP3 players were before the iPod, and then the iPod came out, and they were like, well, that's an MP3 player, but I want that one. So it wasn't so much a concept they had to introduce. It was just a focused effort in that realm that said, oh, yeah, there's those other things, but here's this thing. I kind of feel like NFC as a technology in the consumer space just isn't mature enough yet for Apple to take that stance and say, yeah, you guys know what this is. Well, here's a really great way that we're going to let you use it. We're going to simplify it, and this is our take on it. And, you know, I feel like it could go both ways. I don't really know what Apple is thinking, if they're going to be the drivers of it or if they're going to wait until people know about it and then make it the big thing.
I have a question for you about that then. So Apple, as we both know, pretty much everybody knows this. Well, first of all, let me just say that we never heard that there would be NFC on the next iPhone. We didn't hear there wouldn't be, but we didn't hear there would be. That's not a story. Someone like Jim saying there won't be, that's a good story. But when it comes to NFC, Apple never thinks about technology. They are a feature-focused company. For example, Siri, they don't describe Siri as a series of technologies that enable something. They talk about Siri, the virtual assistant. And we talked about this on previous podcasts. Apple would probably not make a big deal about, look, there's an NFC chip in our phone. They would just say, look, you can use your phone to pay for things at Starbucks and JCPenney. So if we look at what NFC could do as a set of features, there are other ways to do those features. For example, mobile transactions. Apple is already doing that at the Apple Store with the Apple Store app, using scanning, using geofencing. If you talk about point-to-point communications, there's going to be there's already Bluetooth 4.0 in the iPhone. There'll be Bluetooth 4.0 in the iPhone 5. That is a low power, direct point-to-point connection. There were also rumors this week that there'd be Wi-Fi direct in the new iPhone, so that AirPlay could go direct, and you wouldn't need to have everything on the same local network, but you could go beam to beam, device to device, point to point. And all of these things do what NFC does, but I believe that they're also all more secure than NFC. And Andy Ihnatko made a good point about this yesterday on MacBreak Weekly when he said that it is, while not trivial, it is not difficult to hack NFC and make it do all sorts of things which are not secure. For example, make you go to a URL, download things. And that's probably something Apple would stay away from. And the Wall Street Journal did report that Apple was exploring NFC, but ultimately the executives at Apple raised, I think it was Oppenheimer maybe, raised the point about security. And they ended up shelving it for that very reason, that you could not secure the kinds of interactions that Apple wanted to do. So Seth, do you really care whether there's NFC or not, or just that there's that functionality, whether it's over Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, or something else?
I don't care right now, today, and for the immediate future. I don't care if I can't do that next cool thing, with my phone in terms of payment. I have an easier time, given the fact that, security is a question that continues to come up. I have an easier time thinking that Apple would try to take the already very robust set of services surrounding one's Apple ID and make that a payment gateway for a bunch of other things. So I could have an easier time saying, oh, I'm going to buy other stuff outside of iTunes now, outside of the Apple Store, outside of, store.apple.com with my Apple ID. And my Apple ID is going to be the single point of billing that gets dumped onto my credit card each month. Like, I think they would almost take that next step, because that's such a familiar thing in the market. People are used to using it for these types of purchases already. Say, yeah, you're used to buying books and music and movies and apps. Now you can buy some other stuff with your Apple ID too. And then at that point, once that has become an acceptable avenue for commerce, I think then when the security's been ironed out, then they say, and, a year or two, down the road, your Apple ID is your gateway to all your stuff in the course of your month, and it hits your credit card and it's safe and secure. And now we've finally got it to a place where we like it on the phone. Now you can do this other thing too, and it's called PayWave, and it'll have some name like FaceTime that isn't NFC, and that's the next iteration of that. That's how the Apple ID gets extended outside of tapping your password in.
Yeah, well, Apple's very good at step by step bringing devices to the mainstream. Like the Apple user interface started off very simple, and it's still simple. For example, if you and I mentioned this previously before, if you want to, you can ignore almost all the advanced features like double click for the fast app switcher or bringing down notification center and just use your phone as a phone. And it's not hard to imagine that Passbook right now, all it does is store vouchers and tickets and coupons and other things like that. And it's not the Apple Wallet that some people want, that, they've seen from the Google Wallet or the Microsoft Wallet. But it's only a step away from that. It's a very good way of getting people acclimatized to having wallet-like things on their iPhone. And then it's an easy next step once Apple does sign those agreements with the Starbuckses or JCPenney's. Or Targets. I mean, it's that thing we've talked about, bringing the consumer along with them.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and that's the thing. We've seen them kind of take everyone step by step through, the revisions to the operating system and the new features and stuff like that. And yeah, you're right. I mean, you don't have to come along for the new stuff, but you're along by default because you're along, and it's there if and when you want to employ it. So, my gut tells me that Apple is not going to be the one to push this until somebody else has ironed out the security. Maybe they'll iron the security out, but I think it's far more likely that just the Apple ID as we know it today gets extended to a lot of other spokes of purchase around your life.
Yeah, I mean, we will have to wait for the Santa doing his last minute Christmas shopping at Target commercial maybe until next year. But even then, I'm not sure it'll be NFC based. Paul C in the chat room And I think JJ Wicks were both saying that NFC is not insecure. It's just certain implementations of it are insecure. And that may well be, Apple did not rush into 3G. They did not rush into LTE. They have not gone to the newer, faster version of Wi-Fi yet. It seems with radios, Apple is happier to play a conservative game, and especially with transactions, which is a big deal. I mean, if something goes wrong with transactions, it'll make AntennaGate look like a passing fad. So I think that they're gonna be slow and steady with this one.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. When you start playing with people's money, AntennaGate does look like a blip on the radar compared to the mushroom cloud that would occur with purchases like that.
Yeah, and even when Apple does roll it out, I have a feeling it will be exactly that, with a few small partners at the start, and then it will expand, always with select partners.
Yep. Just like iTunes did. I mean, iTunes started with one or two or three labels, and it just kept rolling like a snowball down a hill in a cartoon and just picking up more stuff. And that's probably exactly the strategy they'll use.
I mean, there are things that Apple can do by force of will alone. Like when they created the App Store, they can put the App Store on the iPhone, and when they created the iPad, they could extend the App Store to the iPad because they control the entire nut from beginning to end. But with things that involve other people, like we saw this with exactly what you said with music. We've seen them try to talk to the cable companies and the movie studios for years, and they fight tooth and nail and inch for inch to get every little piece of it. And I think with payments, they have to involve other people. Customers have to be willing to make those payments, but stores have to be willing to take them. And the Apple Store, they could just do, and they've done it. But other people's stores, they have to convince them that it's safe, it's secure, and there's a benefit of using Apple over using Visa or, is the term Interact in the US too, Seth? Bank card payments?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's not something you hear a lot, but I have heard it.
Yeah, so I mean, there's established ways of doing this, and if you're going to introduce a new way, you have to do it very carefully.
Yeah, and think about it this way too. Right now, Apple has deals with media companies and developers, and there's something in it for everybody. Like with developers, it's a 70% revenue share, and to Apple's 30%. So what is the deal going to be for physical retailers and things?
30%.
Yeah, right. Things that are in the real world that people are buying hard goods and, walking out of a store with them. Like what is the value proposition to the merchant that is so alluring that they're going to give up, not even give up other methods of payment, but say, yeah, this is definitely something I want to be a part of, implement and push, in my store.
And if you look, the carriers have been a huge impediment. I think you can only get Google Wallet on Sprint, and it's actively blocked. I may be remembering this incorrectly because I haven't looked recently, but it's actively blocked on other devices because the carriers have their own, of course, like they've always had their own app store schemes. They have their own mobile payment schemes, and the credit card companies have their own mobile payment schemes. And Steve Jobs had that talk at All Things Digital where he said that it was really painful working with the carriers, and the cable companies are even more fractured. And when you start to have something like payments, which involves retail chains, carriers, and credit card processing companies, I think that is the Pandora's box of bag of hurt.
Yep, absolutely. That's a tough nut to crack for sure.
So I want to talk more for a second about these rumors of Wi-Fi Direct. It was called AirPlay Direct, but that was said not to be an official name. I believe it was the Telegraph, UK newspaper, the Telegraph, that started these. It said Apple would be including it. Samsung has had Wi-Fi Direct in their devices for a while, and the whole idea, again, is that right now with Apple devices, if you want to AirPlay, for example, from your iPhone to your Apple TV or to a pair of AirPlay speakers, you have to have all of them on the local Wi-Fi network. Which is fine, but if you're not too technical or you don't have a Wi-Fi network, I know lots of people, certain age group, a certain, sort of technological adversity just don't have it. Or, for example, if you have a guest over, or if you go to a hotel that offers this service, you may, for whatever reason, it's more complicated to have a local Wi-Fi network that serves as the hub for all of these communications. And if you could take that away, if you could just put a direct communications from your iPhone to your Apple television, from your iPad to your speakers, it's media is nice, but you start to get the idea that maybe you could beam any data from iPhone to iPad, or maybe from these devices to other peripherals that Apple's experimenting with or other companies are experimenting with. And that just seems like the next step of ease of use and the future of this kind of technology to me.
Yes, I 100% agree. I think that the hurdle of having to use Wi-Fi because it is so ubiquitous in the home has to go away at some point. But, obviously what gets, what does it get replaced with? What is low power enough that it can remain on all the time, always listening on every device, so that when you want to do it, it doesn't take a couple seconds to reinitiate a connection, and it doesn't have to, send you through a gateway where you have to enter a little passcode and make sure everything's on, it's, in order for it to work the way that Apple wants these kinds of things to work, it has to just be always on, be not, degrading your overall experience of the device. Like, imagine you get something like this and it's on your phone and it's on your Apple TV and you're like, yeah, it's on the Apple TV, great. It's on my phone, but I noticed when I turned it on and left it on all day, my battery went down like 25% more. Yeah. Like, LTE alone is going to be a challenge for the battery. You add yet another radio and it just makes things even more kind of...
Here's the thing. I mean, my mother has a CRT television still. Don't judge her. She's a mother.
No judging.
And which means she doesn't work with an Apple TV. I've bought her an Apple TV. It's sitting there in the box because she can't use it. So what I did instead was get her one of the Apple AV cables. It's a little dock cable. It goes into the television. And if I have my iPad at home and I hit the AirPlay button and I turn off the screen, the battery drain is not that much. I mean, it does drain, but it's not huge because the screen is off, and the screen is what takes a lot of that power. If I go to her place and plug the iPad in, and it is charging because it is in a dock cable, so it is going to a power outlet, and it is going to the TV, but the screen is on, the battery just drains and drains and drains.
Yeah.
So I think that, I mean, it's definitely a balance. But the thing that I find even more interesting, Seth, and I'm not sure what will happen with this, is what about the idea of AirDrop over Wi-Fi Direct? I mean, Macs would definitely do it, but Apple has gone to such pains to hide the file system. Do you think that they would even consider exposing a direct file-to-file? Would Hollywood let them in case we try to steal music? You think there's even a possibility of AirDrop in iOS?
I honestly don't think there is, because aside from photos and videos, what is it that people are going to share? I think that kind of stuff is the stuff that is most likely to be shared, and there's already like 3 different ways to share that. So
we could bump like on Android Beam, or like the old Palm infrared beam.
Yeah, but you can do that with apps in the App Store now. Like there's nothing, they're not going to take what they consider an antiquated notion of a file system and somehow link it to iOS. As much as we would think it's cool, people aren't using iOS that way. People are not going to say, "Boy, I wish I could just throw this Word document that I was working on in Documents to Go over to my Mac," because
there's an iCloud for that.
That's not how people are using this. So I don't know that that's even something they would need to go near, to like AirDrop, because I wish I could see stats on how many people are even using AirDrop, because it seems to me like one of those things in Lion that's just there and is going to be orphaned at some point. It might stay in the operating system, but it's just never going to get any love because, how many people are honestly using it? I don't know.
A lot of my Twitter stream seems to want it badly.
Well, think about your Twitter stream. I mean, you're talking about
alpha geeks.
Yeah, you're talking about a very interesting subsection of the population.
Don't you judge my Twitter stream, Seth Clifford.
I have a similar stream. I'm not judging.
Your stream is every bit as alpha geeky.
So is this the kind of thing that like Bluetooth, low power Bluetooth 4 or whatever, is that what people are assuming this is going to be? Like it's going to be kind of bolted on to a radio that is already present in the phone and they're going to kind of like repurpose it? Is that where we're headed?
Well, here's the thing. There's 2 main segments of Bluetooth 4.0. One is the ultra low power stuff. And we did a video recently where I tried one. It was the Find My Car Smarter app, where it basically just geofences your car and lets you find it without you having to even open an app, because it knows when your phone is off. It just pings the GPS, records it, lets you go about your business. But the other thing is Bluetooth High Speed, and Bluetooth High Speed actually piggybacks off Wi-Fi. So I don't know if you necessarily need to use both technologies. Do you need Wi-Fi Direct if you're enabling Bluetooth over Wi-Fi? Do you still need the point-to-point system? Would Apple just choose whichever one they felt was the best performance power trade-off? Or would Apple just not care about that functionality beyond AirPlay, which is kind of my feeling? Because Apple, with iOS, they've been all about sharing legitimately purchased content, but not at all about sharing file systems outside the soup that is iCloud.
Yeah, I know. As you were saying that, I was thinking about it too. Like, they can't really make it Bluetooth because people turn Bluetooth off. That's not something that everybody has on all the time. So people leave Wi-Fi on a lot, but people also turn that off. So it's going to have to be something that sits outside of those radios that is just dedicated to point-to-point connection.
And AT&T will let you use it provided you upgrade to a shared plan.
Yeah, there'll be some little catch somewhere.
What, me worry about the FCC? No.
Yeah.
All right, so shifting gears to the iPad mini. Back in May, iMore heard that Apple was going to have an iPad mini available, a shrunken down iPad for between $200 and $250, and would debut it in October. Then at the end of July, we heard that Apple was going to have an event on September 12th, which has since been nothing's conclusive until Apple actually announces it, but has been corroborated by a lot of sources, so it makes it highly likely. We heard that they would be doing both the iPhone 5 and the iPad mini at that event. Since then, John Gruber logicked it out that it would make more sense for Apple to do two events. They get twice the media bang for their media buck. And while Jim Dalrymple did not yep it, he did call John Gruber I believe he was a clever fellow, a smart man, something of that ilk. And then John Pachowski of All Things D, and I apologize if I'm not saying his name correctly, I'll have to double check that, said that his sources gave him an identical story. So it sounds like the iPad mini will be coming in October. We always heard that it would be shipping in October, but that they would announce it earlier. And my question is this: do you think Apple's threat level for the small tablet has subsided? Because when we originally heard about it back in May, there was some concern the Kindle Fire could pick up momentum, that the Nexus 7 could be we didn't know exactly what it was, but a Google tablet could be a high-selling device, and that Apple might need to get out ahead of the holidays and make sure people knew a small iPad was coming, and they might have to be price competitive with the $200 Kindle and the $200 Google tablet, which is now the Nexus 7. And it turns out that those tablets, while they're good devices, they have not set the market on fire. They're not selling in iPad numbers. So you think that took pressure off of Apple, Seth, and they're now happy to take their time with this?
I think that's a possibility. I think that there was a lot of activity around that 7-inch tablet space over the past 3 months, in advance of the Nexus 7 being announced, the Nexus 7 hitting, the Nexus 7 selling pretty well, people getting excited about it. I mean, we've talked about it, it's a great little device. I think that they may be more comfortable with the fact that time is now passing and they really aren't continuing to build exponentially on their numbers. Like, they had probably a pretty big surge. They're probably selling still, even the Kindle Fire is probably selling at what Amazon would consider a decent clip, but just not at iPad numbers. So it is indeed possible that they looked at the trend and went, well, we could probably buy a little more time and maybe push this out a little bit. I just think that they really don't do anything in a reactionary way. Mm-hmm. Everything they do is really carefully orchestrated. And
well, they have vocally said things about Android in the past.
Oh yeah, well, absolutely.
An A+ update and taking Google off of their devices, sort of thing.
Yeah, but I don't know that they ever felt pressured to release a device. I think that they wanted to release a device like this, but I don't think they ever felt pressured because nothing is really eating into the 10-inch iPad market. And yeah. I'm obviously rounding up. It's not 10-inch, but whatever. Nothing is eating into that market significantly enough that would give them pause and say, wow, we are really leaving money on the table or missing this. There's a gap here that we need to fill. I think that they probably thought about it and said, yeah, we can do that too, and started the ball rolling. But I don't think any of this was done as a preventative measure or in answer to something else. I think that They saw 7-inch Android tablets when they came out. We all kind of collectively went, yeah, that's cool, but they're not great. They're starting to get very good. Nexus 7 is a very good tablet, but none of this on their end is done in reaction to this. This is done probably because they were like, yeah, we can do that. We might not do it next month, but we're going to do it.
Oh, you want to see a 7-inch tablet, do you? You want to see, okay, fine. You're going to see a 7-inch tablet.
Hey, sorry to interrupt. The chat room is saying I'm really...
I increased you.
Oh, okay. All right. I'll try to get closer, but I haven't touched my volume, so I just...
You could turn into it, talk right into it like the radio jocks do.
I could do that, but then you're going to hear my heavy whiskey-soaked breathing. All right.
Yeah, so, I mean, it should be really interesting come October. We'll save that. We'll save more talk of that for a future episode, because I saw you talking on the Twitter, Seth, about you having a new text editing love. And maybe it's not new, maybe it's updated, but Drafts 2.0 came out and they created an interface for the iPad now as well. It's, I believe, $2 for the iPhone, $3 for the iPad. It's got a bit of a Birdhouse vibe to me, but basically you put text in it, and tell me if I'm misstating this, but you put text in it, then you do whatever the hell you want with it. You send it to any of your Twitter accounts, your Facebook, you share it with other apps, you use it just as text should be intended to be used. Am I nailing that one?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, Drafts has been out for a while. I bought it initially when it came out, and it was a cool app, and it did a lot of cool things. The latest update is just spectacular. I mean, what you said is accurate. Basically, the premise behind Drafts is that it is a super, super fast, text capture input mechanism. So you launch it, and you're instantly typing or dictating in the case of, a device that can do that, and capturing text. Once the text is captured, you can back right out of it, and the text is sitting there the next time you go in. You don't even have to think about it. If you want to act on that text, it has so many different native things that it can do, like you said, posting to Twitter, posting to Facebook, sending emails, sending an iMessage, doing all that stuff. But then there's so many hooks into other apps that there's a nearly limitless amount of things you can do with it. And it's highly configurable as to, how you want these services to interact. And it supports Markdown, it supports Text Expander. It's grown into something that went from a novelty utility, oh, that's cool, and I like using that, to, wow, I have to find a way to use this more because it's extremely flexible and I like the way this works.
It's just become my go-to way of I just put all text in there because I know that no matter where I end up using it, I can get it there through Drafts. And that means I don't have to think. I don't have to think about what app I want to open, what app I'm ultimately going to use it for. I can just put it in Drafts until I need to do otherwise with it.
Yep. And it's also, this latest version of it has added sync. It has a sync solution. Mm-hmm. It's not Cloud, it's not Dropbox, it's Imperium, I think, is the name of it.
Yes.
And there's a little post on the blog about why they went with that and not, iCloud or Dropbox, the standards. It's fine. It works exceptionally well. I did some tests with it. I mean, you start typing, you save a draft, it is instantly on your other device. So regardless of the fact that it's something other than what we're familiar with, it is working very, very well. And the fact that it is on the iPad now makes me extremely happy. And the fact that it syncs between my devices makes me even happier.
The sync, it works. It is absolutely workable. The only lamentation I have over the lack of Dropbox is that I use BBEdit on my Mac. I basically live in BBEdit on my Mac, and I would be able to open files from Dropbox in there, save them, open them in Drafts.
So you're saying compose in BBEdit on the Mac and then open them in Drafts?
Yeah, or vice versa. I mean, it would mean that I would have access to all my textual stuff on the Mac as well, because a lot of things I could open up on any application that can open Dropbox files.
You can go from Drafts to Dropbox. You can create text files that get dumped into Dropbox, and it also, I think, if I'm
not sure it pulls them out though, does it?
No, I don't think it pulls them out, but you can also, I think what it can do now is it can take a single text file, like a journal.txt file in the apps folder in your Dropbox and append to it as you can add a draft to it as an action. So I think it goes to Dropbox. I don't think it comes out of Dropbox. I mean, the main thrust of the app is that you're entering stuff and sending it somewhere. It's not so much that you're pulling text in from other places.
I think you're thinking of round tripping.
I'm think I'm thinking of tripping over my words.
Yeah, I like the round tripping. I like the round tripping from my Mac to my iOS devices, my iPhone, my iPad, and back. If I can just, because the one problem I have with iCloud is that it puts documents into apps, and then I have to remember what document is associated with what app. I like the idea that I can open documents in any app I damn well feel like it. So I just know that file is there in Dropbox, and if I'm using Elements, if I'm using any BB edit, if I'm using Drafts, I just want to be able to open the file, edit it, save it again, and know that it is everywhere. I'm lazy that way.
No. I mean, once you make the mental commitment to setting your things up like that, that's exactly how I do it. Everything, I've said this many times, everything in my world lives in my Dropbox, and I have single point folders, like a notes folder that is just chock full of plain text files. And I have a couple other folders that you can access, but the goal is to have ultimate flexibility with whatever tool you want to use and have everything pointing to the same place so that no matter what you want to use, you can always get the stuff in and out. Mm-hmm. And if it's you like to try something different or something, you need another tool to do another job. I mean, once you make that commitment and say, this is how I want to do things, your whole world opens up. It's amazing.
Yeah, see, I want my workflow to be as stress-free as possible. And the way that you stress-proof stuff is that you don't have to worry. You don't have to think. Things are just where they are, regardless of how you approach them. But I brought this up as a way to segue, Seth, because during the last week, Dropbox has instituted, or has, I don't know what the right word is, they have pushed forward, they have allowed two-factor verification. So you can now set up your Dropbox so that in addition to your Dropbox password, it will SMS you a code as a second layer of security, or you can use something like Google Generator to create a time-based code to implement. So you have something your password, and something you have, your phone, which either has SMS or the app on it. And that is a way stronger solution. And for people like me and you, like almost my entire home directory is in Dropbox. I enabled it immediately when it was in beta in the forums on Dropbox. Have you looked at it yet?
I've looked at it a little bit. I haven't yet enabled it because I noticed that there was a comment from 1Password that people who are using 1Password to sync through Dropbox might want to hold off because there were some things that were maybe not working quite yet. And I absolutely rely on 1Password, if as much as, if not more, than I rely on Dropbox. So I held off as of yet until I have the time to actually read all the blog posts and figure out what the story is. But primarily, I wasn't as concerned because anything that I keep in Dropbox that I care about, that that's even remotely sensitive, is in an encrypted disk image. And I've written about that for the site. I've talked about it multiple times. All the stuff that sits outside of that disk image is like, whatever. If it got out, I'd be pissed about it, but I don't think my world would implode. But that's just the way that I use it. So
see, I didn't know about this 1Password thing because that would have stopped me too. But the minute I saw it, I tried it because I wrote a how-to for the site. And if you haven't tried it yet and you want to, we have a full how-to up because that would have stopped me cold too. But I have not had any problems with 1Password. Someone, and forgive me, I forget who, on Twitter, it might have been Michael T. Rose from Tua, said that, because my comment was, Dropbox tells you to write down this emergency code that you can disable two-factor verification with if you ever have a problem. And I'm like, I'm not going to write this down. I'm going to put it in 1Password. And then Mike Rose pointed out that that's kind of like putting the key to a locked door inside the room that is locked for safekeeping. But 1Password was kind enough to say that, no, you can still access your 1Password stuff over the web to a local file on your computer if you ever need to.
All right. So as follow-up, immediate follow-up, I'm putting into the chat room the link from AgileBits. Now, I read this quickly, so I will issue a semi-retraction. In the front of the post, it says, the bottom line is that I'm recommending that 1Password users not be early adopters of this. And it goes on to say, it works pretty well. There shouldn't be a problem. Most 1Password users would be okay, but it might be a little early to start using the two-step authentication because it adds levels of complexity to, the Dropbox syncing and stuff that you have. I'm ashamed to say it. I think I probably saw this, said, yes, send to Instapaper, read that first paragraph that said, I'm not recommending 1Password users be early adopters of this, and went, yeah, that's good enough for now. I'll read this later and I'll set it up later.
I took the bullet for the community, Seth. I did it so that people at iMore who wanted to do it could do it too. And so far, knock wood, I've been okay.
Yeah, and I skimmed it just now, and it says that everything seems to be working okay. So you probably won't have problems with it, but I didn't have the time to deep dive like you did, and I just was like, you know what, I need my stuff to work. It's working right now. I'll touch it later this week.
I didn't deep dive. I cannonballed off the diving board, not even thinking about it.
All right, well,
pick your splash.
Yeah.
All right, so we have some questions. We have taken it seriously. There were some people who said, "Why don't you do questions the way that Android Central and WP Central do?" So I said, we should really do that. We should make that a point of doing that. So we have a few questions tonight. This one is from Mr. Del Fuego. Since we know that all the features of iOS 6 have not been announced, what are some features that you would like to see announced at the iPhone announcement? Is there anything that you think Apple is likely to do, Seth? You think there's anything under the kimono they have not yet flashed us with?
I don't honestly know. I mean, I have an expectation that there will be something at the event to go along with the new hardware, but I have not really given it any thought as to what I think it would be. I mean, they usually don't do hardware announcements without kind of keeping a little nugget or two that didn't come out at WWDC and saying, and here's the thing that we are adding to iOS, X6, whatever you want to say. I say X, not OS X. I say X, like put whatever number.
Well, we do know, though, like in past years, for the last few years, there's always been a video thing. There was originally video recording. Then there was 720p. Then there was 1080p. And Phil Schiller has gotten to talk about his optics and his photons and his whatnot. And this year, we've heard rumors that the panorama feature, which did not come out in iOS 5, even though it was buried in there, might have been significantly improved and could make an appearance. But it's not hard to imagine there'll be, something around the camera. And also previously we've got FaceTime and Siri. Actually, we got voice control with the 3GS, FaceTime with the 4, and Siri with the 4S. So there'll be something demonstrable from Scott Forstall, and it could still be yet more Siri stuff. We did see a lot of Siri stuff, but there could be more Siri stuff, or maybe it will be AirPlay Direct. I don't think we'll see anything that, catches us totally by surprise, though.
No, I don't think it's going to be anything that blows us completely out of our seats. I think it'll be something that will seem logical when it's announced and will still be a good feature to have, but it's not going to be something crazy.
All right, this is another question. One of the things Steve Jobs wanted to crack was the camera. If he had, do you think it would be similar to the Galaxy camera? What do you think a digital camera running iOS would look like? And for those who haven't seen it, I'll put it in the show notes, but Samsung today at the IFA 2012 conference announced the Galaxy camera, which is basically the front of a camera with a giant screen on the back running Android 4.1 Jelly Bean. A little bit of a customized build because it's landscape mode primarily, and you can run Angry Birds on it, but you can't make a phone call. It's not a phone. Do you think Apple would slap iOS on some future version of the old Apple camera?
The Quick Shot?
Yeah. Do you think there'd be like a Quick Shot 10?
It's a good question. That's a good question. I don't think that would happen because I think that... You still there?
Yep.
Oh, all right. Our video cut out for me.
Oh. Nope, still there.
Okay. I don't think that Apple will dilute the devices that they have now by adding another consumer type of device like that. I don't see them putting software on a dedicated device and saying, here's another great way you can do this, because they've been so careful to take the features of all these other devices and bring them to the iPhone and to iOS. So I think if anything, we will see more dedicated hardware devices assimilated into the iPhone than I would say we're going to see iOS put onto other dedicated devices. Like that's one of the benefits of Android, is that you can do that. Like Android could be, humorously, we've said, on your refrigerator, on your toaster, whatever.
On your adult novelty toy. I mean, it could really be anywhere.
Could be anywhere. But that's exactly what it's for. At the core of the operating system is that it doesn't just have to be on a phone. It could be anywhere. Whereas iOS, yes, it can be on a phone or an iPad or whatever, but Apple is going to pull hardware features into a device and make it more compelling to have that single device, as opposed to saying, well, you should buy this and maybe this other thing. Because I think at this point, people are conditioned to say, well, why would I want that when I could kind of do it with my phone?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, Daniel Rubino, he is as much a camera nerd as a phone nerd. He runs WP Central, and he was on the podcast earlier today. You can find it on Android Central or WP Central. And he was talking about, what you can do with all, like Instagram built into your high-end point and shoot, like built into a Lumix or built into a high-end Sony camera, which is basically what this is. It gives you all those cool sharing and processing features that a phone does, but with much better optics. I think he said f1.4, like a good f1.4 lens on a nice big sensor. But Apple, to me, seems like they're more interested in multitaskers than unitaskers. They'll just make the best damn camera they can on an iPhone, and that'll be their compromise. They won't compromise iOS to fit on a camera, but they'll make the best compromise for a camera to fit on an iPhone,
right?
And to some extent, an iPad and iPod Touch.
Yeah, and they'll continue to make the camera better each year, and it'll, end up at some point completely subsuming the point and shoot market for most people, not all, but most. And then there's going to be the thing that you have in your pocket all the time, and then your next step up, your prosumer, your DSLR. I have a DSLR. I love using it, but I don't have it in my pocket every day.
Next question from Francisco. He wants to know, do you guys think those iPhone 5 leaks are from the real iPhone 5? Something in my gut is telling me that it's not. Even though I will buy the iPhone 5 anyway, regardless of what it looks like, something tells me that Apple will surprise us with a radically redesigned iPhone 5. Something tells me that these parts have been leaking for the past few months are fake. Do you guys agree? Apple makes prototypes. Apple makes generally 2 or 3 prototypes for any device. As far as we know, there were 3 for the iPhone 5. One that was 3.5 inches, one that was 4 inches, and a third one that I believe was also 4 inches. And it looks like they're going ahead with one of the 4-inch ones. Now, parts from a prototype they did not go ahead with could leak, but I don't think a company like Apple, and I'm not the first one to say this, has the time or money to waste seeding large amounts of parts throughout the supply chain in China just to throw off a few pesky bloggers. Because despite the amount of noise we generate and geeks on the internet generate, we are a very small part of Apple's market. And they have, for example, messed around by putting like iPhone 10,1 in the firmware just to, poke fun at bloggers. I don't think they would actually order, manufacture, and leak parts. Seems like a lot of work, Seth.
I would think that it is a lot of work, and I would tend to agree with you. I don't think that they're going to spend time, money, effort, and hours trying to do that. I mean, it's one thing to take a prototype and stick it in a shell that looks like another phone so you can use it without causing a stir. It's another thing to have a manufacturing run, enough of a manufacturing run that looks like a real parts order. I mean, parts in the thousands, not just like, oh, just give us 12 of those, and because no one's going to bite at that. They're going to be like, oh, this is obviously just some little one-off thing. I don't see that happening. I think that, the old adage where there's smoke, there's fire applies. I think that what we're seeing is probably very close to what we will see. It might not be exactly what we're going to see, but I think it's pretty close to it. And there's one really important thing to remember as we talk about these things. We, as mobile phone nerds, exist in this glorious echo chamber where we think that all of the shouting that we're doing actually matters to people.
That Apple is actually listening.
Yeah, Apple and our wives and our families and our coworkers and everybody who doesn't eat, sleep, breathe, and live this stuff, they have no idea what's going on. I could go upstairs and ask my wife right now, so you see those parts leak? And she'd be like, what part, like dressers and beds? What are you talking about? She has no idea. And it's not because she's an idiot. It's because real people, regular people, don't care. This is not something they spend their days thinking about. So I think that's probably pretty close to the phone we'll see. And that's really about the end of it. I don't think the rest of the world is even interested.
For it to not be the real phone, Apple would have had to gone to the trouble of making another phone that makes sense, that is contextual, logical, and semi-functional. So if you think about it, for example, if someone leaked a fake Avengers movie, it would have to be good enough quality. It would have to be able to sit side by side with however many hundreds of millions of dollars they spent on the actual Avengers movie to convince people. And the expense and time, if Apple did that, I'd be appalled. I would much rather they spend that time and money on making sure the actual phone is as good as possible. I don't want any flaws in a phone that could have been fixed by them giving it its undivided attention.
Here, I'll put a different kind of spin on this, and then we can move on to whatever. Apple is still a public company. Apple's board answers to shareholders. I don't think Apple is going to spend money from the company on a fake phone and then try to explain to shareholders how that benefits them by protecting the real phone. You know, like, that's just not what companies do. That's what, like, crazy mad scientists who live in volcanoes and have sharks with lasers on their heads do, but that's not what real public companies do.
Really, Seth? Really?
Yeah, no, it's not. So, I mean...
Really, Mr. Bigglesworth?
They have to conduct themselves in a manner befitting public companies. That's not something they do.
Seth likes fake phones. Mini-Me does not. Mini-Me don't. They're not the Diet Coke of evil. Only 1 calorie, not very evil. Karn wants to know, do you think sales will be affected if the style and exterior of the iPhone 5 is not that different from the iPhone 4S or its predecessor? It's about time we saw a different looking phone. I'll respond with why. Apple is not a fashion house. They don't make skirts, above the knee one year and below the knee the next year just to sell more skirts. They make the best phone that they can make. And I would be horribly disappointed if Apple changed just for change's sake. They seem to have settled. I mean, we saw that prototype, that Project Purple prototype from years ago. That was the platonic form, the ideal for what an Apple phone would be. And I think until they have an idea that is so compelling, that is so much better than this, that's the design they're going to use.
Yeah, I think people will be disappointed. And by people, I mean some really whiny bloggers. And everyone else in the whole world will buy the phone and not have another word to say about it. They might say, boy, this looks like the other one. But they're not going to lose sleep over it. It's not going to affect their purchase decision. And no one will care. I think that Apple has been on a path since the first phone. Obviously, the first phone was mostly metal and had the plastic around the antennas. I think they wanted to follow that, but realized they couldn't feasibly do it with what they needed to do with the antennas. So then we had the plastic backs of the 3G and the 3GS.
They were compromises.
Right. I think that the 4 and the 4S represent a jump that they were finally able to make engineering-wise and design-wise toward what their ultimate goal actually is. And I think that this design, this kind of, squarish, rectangle with round edges, I think this is going to be the thing that gets polished and iterated upon for the next 2 or 3 years. I don't think there's going to be giant changes other than maybe it gets a little thinner, maybe this edge is a little rounded. It's going to be variations on this theme for a little while because they've sold more of this than any other phone in history. Mm-hmm. And I think that they're very happy with it. I think that they're not going to just change it just to change it. They're not going to make a teardrop phone. They're not going to do something crazy. Like you said, they're going to take this and say, this is great. Let's make it greater.
Nicely said. Seb or Sam, well, that name sounds familiar, on Twitter says, why does everyone think the iPad mini will be $199? Why would Apple sell an iPad mini at the same price as the iPod Touch? Do you have an answer for that, Seth?
Because they can. They want to sell a lot of them.
Whenever people say that, I mean, like, it could be, I think if Amazon and the Nexus 7 were selling better, it would be a shoo-in to be very low. I think they could now afford to go $250, around. But there was this very telling quote from Steve Jobs that said, after he left Apple, they had a decision whether they could go for profit or market share. And they chose profit at the expense of market share. And they went from having a huge lead over Windows to being surpassed by Windows. And that he did not want to make that mistake again. So I think that this is their play. Their play, the iPad mini is clearly designed to be 100 million selling, multiple 100 million selling device. And they are going to do whatever they can to get it, to make it the runaway smash hit, if not this holiday season, then certainly for the years to follow.
Yeah. I think if the other 7-inch tablets, the Nexus and the Kindle Fire, were really, really crushing that space at their price point, I think there'd probably be an incentive for them to say, you know what, let's just do 199 and just choke this whole thing out and be done with it. But I think you're right. I think that they're probably going to taper off. Like, Amazon is rumored to have a new Kindle Fire in the next week or so we'll see what happens there. My guess would be that it's a little thinner, a little nicer, does all the same stuff, and maybe costs a little bit less. Maybe,
because, Amazon is a well-known hardware and software specialist.
As we all know.
Yes.
But, no, I think by the time this thing comes out, I think they can get away with $249. I'd love to see it at $199. I know that they could do it at $199.
Would Mrs. Clifford get one at $199?
I'd probably get her one, yeah.
Nice.
But they wouldn't be making their normal margins, but it would be more of a long-term play, like, let's own this space. It wouldn't be a short-term, let's just sell a lot of these. That would be the goal, but it would be a long play.
All right, so here's the next question. This is from David DeWale. What's the rumor on storage capacities for the iPad mini 8, 16, and 32? All I have heard about is that the cheap version will probably be 8 gigabytes because it will be the cheap version. But my guess, and this is totally a guess, no birdies were hurt or listened to in the making of this answer, is that it'll be similar to the iPod Touch, and that we'll see 8, 32, and 64. Because Apple makes the most profit off it makes the best margins off the higher storage capacities, because as you bump up the RAM, they're charging $100 or $200 more for the device, and that's what lets them sell the cheaper one cheaper. So I think 8, 32, 64 is my guess.
You think it's going to be that big of a jump?
Yeah, well, that's what the iPod Touch is now, right? So I don't think there's any big reason not to. I think 64 gigabytes is for people who want a lot of media.
Wait, they have... The iPod Touch is 8, 32, 64?
I believe so. Store.apple.com.
I haven't looked in a really long time. You're probably right.
iPod Touch. We have... Let's see. Do we have a winner? 8 gigabytes, 32 gigabytes, 64 gigabytes. $199, $299, $399.
All right. That makes sense then. I don't know, though. Maybe they'll do 16, 32, 64. Just because 16 is the new 8. I don't know.
Matthew M. Space. Will Samsung continue to copy Apple, or will they be forced to adopt a licensing agreement? Those aren't the options. I mean, we've seen Samsung with the Note and with the Galaxy S3 take a decidedly un-Apple-like turn in their design. I think that will continue. I think they were already moving away from Apple, and this might hasten the move in some specific areas. But I would like to see them come to a licensing agreement. I think that for the industry to move on, everyone should come to a cross-licensing agreement. And then we as consumers will no longer be annoyed by this stuff.
Oh, I love when you talk funny like that.
Isn't it possible that they named the new iPad that because they are planning the name 7-inch iPad the same? That's from Jerry Glez. It'll be interesting to see because we've talked about this before, so I won't spend much time on it, but you have iPad mini, which is now rumored to be the name, and I believe that's the name it's casually being called anyway. You have, iPad Air that John Gruber mentioned. There's not too many things that Apple could name it. My guess is that they'll stick with a mini, just because you have the Mac mini and you had the iPod mini. And the last one, from Sullivan David. How much lead time will Apple give for their September 12th announcement? A week? And as far as I can recall, Seth, that's usually what it is. Usually about a week beforehand, Apple alerts the press posts up the invitations, and then it's go time. It's very seldom anything longer than that.
Yeah, that's about what it is. You did leave one part out, though, after they post the invitations. There's the feverish dissection of the invitation.
It's got red! It's got red on it! Bono's gonna be there!
No, it's about a week. It's traditionally been a short time before the event, but long enough that people can actually get a flight.
Yes. Well, I mean, if you haven't booked already, then you're not really the geek that you should be. And besides Iterate, Seth, where can we find out more about you?
You can find me on Twitter and app.net at Seth Clifford. You can find me here with Renee in Georgia and on Iterate with Mark. And if you want to see the work we do, nickelfish.com.
And you can find me at Rene Ritchie, also on Twitter and app.net. You can find me on Google+, just search for Rene Ritchie. I don't have one of those vanity names like Phil Dickinson or Android Central yet. You can find all of us at iMore or at imore.com. You can email us at podcast@imore.com or just leave a comment on the show when it goes live. For all our shows, you can go to mobilenations.com/shows. And I'd like to thank the iMore store, your one-stop shop for all your iPhone and iPad cases, cables, chargers, and much, much more. Thank you very much, guys. Your support means the world to us. And thank you to our chat room. They are by far the best looking, best smelling, best dressed chat room on the interwebs. And each and every week they make this show just ever so enjoyable for all of us.
Indeed. Good folks.
Excellent, folks. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week. We will be back next Wednesday. And if you haven't yet, join us live at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, 2 a.m. British summertime. It's the best way to experience. I mean, YouTube and YouTube, RSS, iTunes, they're good. But being here live, it's, like I said previously, Shakespeare the way it's meant to be done.
Yep.
Good night, everybody.
See you guys.
Spin up the FDL, Seth. And jump.
Get out of my CIC.